In the beginning, there was only balance. The Orishas, divine emanations of the supreme creator Olodumare, moved through the cosmos not as rivals, but as a sacred chorus, each carrying a distinct vibration, each fulfilling a precise role in the unfolding of creation. Obatalá, the father of form, sculpted the bodies of living beings with patience and clarity. Ogun, the bearer of iron, cleared the primordial forest and opened paths through the unknown. Oya danced with the winds of change, stirring the transitions of life and death. Shango ignited the fire of justice, thunder, and leadership. Orunmila, keeper of wisdom and divination, sat quietly, observing the patterns of destiny unfold beneath his gaze. And Eshu, the trickster and messenger, wove between them all, stirring the unexpected, yet always keeping balance alive. But as the world took shape and humans were gifted with consciousness, something subtle began to shift. For even among divine beings, questions arise. Questions of purpose, of authority, of whose guidance should prevail when the destinies of both humans and spirits intersect. The Orishas were not at war, nor did they seek destruction, but they began to differ in vision, in method, in interpretation of Olodumare's will. What was once a symphony began to slip into dissonance, not through evil, but through the very diversity of their divine nature. And so began a tale rarely spoken outside the inner circles of the elders, a tale not of divine war, but of sacred disagreement, a forgotten moment when the Orishas, forces of harmony, had to confront their own divergence, and in doing so, offered the world its most profound lesson on conflict and reconciliation. The question emerged quietly at first, like a ripple across still water. Who among the Orishas should hold the voice of final judgment in earthly affairs? Not control, for no Orisha seeks dominion over all, but guidance, precedence, a point of spiritual reference that humans could turn to when confusion clouded their hearts. Obatalá, whose calm nature and connection to wisdom had long made him a pillar of peace, believed that clarity and purity must lead. His followers revered him for his fairness, his slow and deliberate speech, and the way he settled disputes without raising his voice. But Ogun, ever bold and direct, countered that without action, without the sharp edge of decision and movement, peace could not be sustained. Form is nothing without the force that cuts the way, he declared, reminding the others that it was his machete that first cleared the path for creation. Then came Shango, brilliant, passionate, and echoing with the rhythm of thunder. It is not enough to build, he said. We must protect, we must judge, we must strike when injustice rises. His charisma was fire, his words a storm. And from the horizon blew Oya, fierce as a hurricane, speaking not to power but to transformation. None of us can lead alone, she said. Change governs all. Even wisdom must bend. Even iron must rust. Even justice must listen. The council grew tense. What had begun as dialogue became declaration. Each Orisha, in their essence, was right, but in their singularity they could not see the full circle. And so, without intending harm, they began to separate, to drift into positions, each certain of their purpose, each unknowingly planting the seeds of divine imbalance. The world below, still young, shivered beneath their growing tension. The sky held its breath, and Eshu smiled at the turning of the winds. The celestial gathering that followed was unlike any before. The Orishas assembled at the center of the spiritual plane, a place beyond time, where the forces of nature met as pure consciousness. It was there that the question of leadership would be put to trial, not through violence, but through demonstration of essence. Each Orisha would reveal not just their strength, but the truth of their role. For truth in the Yoruba cosmology is not proclaimed. It is shown through action, balance, and consequence. Obatalá came forward first, He raised his staff of silver and whispered words into the ether. Around him silence fell like soft snow. Chaos calmed, minds stilled, rivers ceased to churn. His presence brought serenity so profound that even the younger Orishas paused. In that stillness, he reminded them, without form, power dissipates. Without peace, no force can be sustained. His message was not one of control, but of foundation, a sacred reminder that creation begins in stillness, not noise. Then Ogun stepped forth, his body gleaming with the iron he himself had forged. He struck the earth beneath their feet, and the ground cracked open, revealing minerals, paths, and tools. From his hands sprang roads, from his mouth came the rhythm of work. Without movement, there is no growth. Without labor, form decays, he said, his voice like the echo of hammer on anvil. His power was raw, undeniable, necessary. Shango rose next, clothed in red and white, crowned with fire. He summoned thunder, not in rage, but in justice. Lightning carved symbols across the sky, stories of kings and tyrants, balance and retribution. When law is broken, when cruelty reigns, who shall speak for the voiceless? He asked. His message burned with moral force. Justice is not calm, it is storm. The heavens rumbled in assent. Oya answered without a word. She rose as wind, dancing, weeping, roaring, sweeping the sacred ground in spirals. Around her, leaves of memory, seeds of destiny, ashes of endings. I am the breath between life and death, she whispered through the storm, the one who clears the old to birth the new. Each Orisha stood radiant in their truth, but instead of unity, the demonstrations only deepened the divide. None were wrong, yet none would yield. The cosmos, once harmonious, began to hum with discord. And in the distance, Orunmila quietly cast the opal, seeking counsel not from pride or force, but from Ifa, the voice of destiny itself. While the other Orishas spoke with thunder and steel, Orunmila remained seated beneath the sacred Iroko tree, fingers lightly touching the sacred opal chain. His silence was not absence, it was listening. As the arguments swelled around him, he dropped the chain onto the earth, reading the sacred configurations that formed in the dust. The message was clear, etched not in speech, but in the language of eternity. No Orisha was meant to rule alone. Each force existed in complement, not competition. The path to balance lay not in dominance, but in interdependence. He knew this truth, but tradition forbade him from speaking without invitation. Wisdom cannot impose itself, it must be sought. It was Eshu who approached him, a sly smile on his lips, his eyes dancing with mischief and purpose. They've forgotten the center, Eshu said, tossing a stone between his fingers. Forgotten that every force is only sacred because it leans on the others. Orunmila looked up, his gaze steady. Then remind them, he replied. And Eshu, master of crossroads, of paradox, of divine disruption, bowed. That night, Eshu stirred the dreams of the Orishas. He did not frighten them or deceive them. He simply opened doors, visions of a world shaped by one Orisha alone. In Ogun's dream, the world was built, but barren. Roads with no travelers, cities with no song. In Shango's dream, justice reigned, but love had vanished. The fire had consumed even the innocent. Obatalá saw a world of stillness so pure it suffocated, and Oya saw endless change, but no roots, transformation that scattered all meaning. Each awoke with the same realization. Their power alone, without the others, was incomplete. When dawn returned to the divine realm, none spoke immediately. The silence was heavier now, not with pride but with reflection. Eshu had done what none could. He had cracked open their certainty, not with conflict, but with vision. And now, something new stirred in the air, not unity yet, but humility. A sacred pause. The moment before reconciliation. The sacred realm had changed. The Orishas, once aflame with self-assurance, now walked slowly among the trees of the divine garden, their thoughts heavy with revelation. It was not defeat they felt, nor shame, but the weight of seeing themselves more clearly. For each had tasted the limits of their essence when isolated, and in that limitation, something deeper had been revealed. Even gods must grow. Even forces of nature must be reminded that harmony is not born of sameness, but of respectful coexistence. It was Obatalá who first returned to the center of the gathering. Draped in white, face serene, he stood in the presence of the others, not to declare, but to listen. "My form is nothing without breath," he said softly, nodding to Oya. "Without iron, my shapes remain hollow," he added, glancing toward Ogun. "And without justice, even my peace can become complacency," he said, meeting Shango's gaze. One by one, the Orishas reassembled, not as contenders, but as co-creators. Yet a question remained: how to move forward, how to preserve their individual powers while preventing future discord. It was Orunmila who answered, this time invited to speak. He proposed a covenant, not of hierarchy, but of rotation, of balance. Each Orisha would be honored in turn, their strengths called upon as needed, their domains recognized but not elevated above the others. It was not a structure of command, but of rhythm, like the heartbeat, the tides, the cycle of day and night. The Orishas agreed, and as the covenant was sealed through ritual, marked by drums, chants, and offerings, something unseen lifted from the realm. The discord dissolved like mist under sun. Eshu, watching from the edge of the circle, nodded in satisfaction. Not because there was order, but because there was movement. Reconciliation is not the end of conflict, it is its sacred transformation. As the covenant among the Orishas was woven into existence, its resonance rippled through all levels of creation. The earth, which had trembled beneath the tension of the divine, began to exhale. The winds grew gentle. The rivers settled into their courses. The trees seemed to lift their branches higher, as if welcoming back a harmony they had long missed. In the invisible realm between spirit and matter, something had shifted, not a return to the old order, but the birth of a new one. Each Orisha now took on their role with renewed clarity. Ogun continued to forge the paths of civilization, but his iron yielded where Obatalá's vision requested peace. Shango's thunder still rolled, but now waited for the signs revealed through Orunmila's divination. Oya's winds no longer tore without direction. They followed the rhythm of destiny, sweeping only what was ready to be transformed. Even Eshu, often misunderstood, became the guardian of this covenant, ensuring movement did not spiral into chaos, but into evolution. The humans, unaware of the cosmic reconciliation, felt its effects. Where once there was drought, rain began to fall. Where war had lingered, new treaties were formed. Dreams grew clearer. Children were born with deeper intuition. The priests and priestesses who served the Orishas noticed the change. When they cast Ifa, the verses spoke not of confusion, but of alignment. When they called on Ogun, his presence arrived alongside Obatalá's wisdom. When Oya was invoked, her winds whispered Shango's justice. The deities were moving together again, not as separate powers, but as a sacred system, a living balance. It became tradition from that time forward to never invoke one Orisha without acknowledging the presence of others. The altars were built with this in mind, not as monuments to singular forces, but as crossroads of energy. Because the elders knew, when the Orishas disagreed, the world held its breath. But when they reconciled, creation moved forward, not in perfection, but in sacred rhythm. In the generations that followed, the memory of that divine disagreement faded from common knowledge, but its lesson endured in symbols, in ritual, and in the oral teachings of the initiated. Elders across Yoruba land and throughout the diaspora carried fragments of the story in their chants and parables, never speaking it fully, but weaving its essence into the fabric of daily practice. They understood that this tale was not one of scandal among gods. It was a mirror for human behavior and a map for communal survival. In villages where disputes rose among leaders, the Babalawas would remind them even the Orishas once struggled to agree. Or, when rival families refused to speak, the Orishas would recount the sacred gathering under the Iroko tree, not to shame, but to invite remembrance. "There is no crown that rests on one head alone," they would say, echoing Obatalà's words. In these teachings, conflict was never treated as evil. Rather, it was seen as a necessary part of movement, a signal that something deeper needed alignment. Even rituals began to reflect this cosmology of reconciliation. During certain festivals, Ogun's iron would be bathed in water, sanctified by Obatalà's energy. Shango's thunderstones would be offered beneath trees sacred to Oya. Drums played in 3 tones, each calling a different force, yet all forming one rhythm. And in the diaspora, in Brazil, in Cuba, in Haiti, this wisdom evolved through fusion, where different traditions blended not in confusion, but in remembrance of divine cooperation. The Orishas had shown that their strength did not lie in uniformity, but in their ability to listen, to yield, to move together. And those who followed them on earth, the devotees, the priests, the seekers, inherited this sacred choreography, not as myth, but as living truth. That disagreement, when honored, becomes harmony in motion. The deeper significance of this tale lives not only in temples or sacred groves, but within each human being who walks the path of the Orishas. For if the divine forces once stood divided, unsure of how to proceed, then what does that say about us, the children of flesh, navigating a world far more fragmented than the spiritual realms ever were? It says that disagreement is not failure, that struggle is not weakness, that the soul's path is shaped as much by friction as it is by flow. Each Orisha represents a force of nature, yes, but also a force within us. Ogun is not only the god of iron, he is the will to push forward, the builder inside us. Shango is not only thunder, he is the voice that demands justice when silence would be easier. Obatalá is not just peace, he is the clarity that comes when we step back from pride. Oya is not simply the storm, she is the power to release the past, even when we don't feel ready. And Eshu is the one who reminds us that every step we take opens infinite paths, and that intention is everything. So when humans argue, when families fracture, when communities divide, the story of the Orishas becomes a spiritual blueprint. We are invited not to suppress conflict, but to listen to it, to learn from it, and to ask, what is this moment trying to teach us about balance? The Orishas showed that no single truth can carry the weight of existence. Only when many truths learn to walk together does the world find its rhythm again. This is why the story is told in whispers, in symbols, in movement, because it is not a tale to be consumed, but a wisdom to be lived. In candomblé, santeria, and other expressions of Yoruba tradition across the diaspora, this story, though rarely told explicitly, lives in the structure of devotion, the way rituals are organized, the order in which Orishas are saluted, the rhythm of the drums, the choreography of the dances, all echo the ancient understanding that no Orisha stands alone. In a world where human beings are taught to compete, to separate, to dominate, the Orishas instead offer an alternative model, coexistence rooted in respect, not hierarchy. During a toke, a ritual drum ceremony, The drums do not call only to one force. Even when one Orisha is being honored, the rhythms carry the memory of the others. The alabe, the sacred drummer, knows that each beat carries layers of history. To call Shango is also to remember Oya, whose winds temper his fire. To invoke Ogun is to acknowledge the stillness of Obatalá that gives meaning to his action. In this way, the sacred remembers what the ego forgets, that power is not purity and that every force needs a counterbalance. This is also why the Orisha shrines are constructed with care. Even the placement of elements, the iron of Ogun, the stones of Shango, the white of Obatalá, reflects the memory of that divine disagreement. It is not decorative. It is not symbolic in the shallow sense. It is ritual architecture, designed to remind us that the divine moves best where paths cross, where voices meet, where differences are not erased but honored. In times of crisis, the elders consult Ifa not just to find the right Orisha to appease, but to understand which energies are out of sync and which forces need to listen again to each other. In this, the sacred tale remains alive, a reminder that even gods must adjust, must evolve, and must return to center. One of the most striking aspects of this tale is how it subverts the human desire for singular authority. In most mythologies, when divine beings clash, the narrative is resolved through conquest. One god triumphs, others submit, and a new order is imposed. But the Yoruba cosmology, as preserved through the teachings of Babalawos, Orishas, and elders of the tradition, offers a different resolution. Not through dominance, but through convergence. The story of when the Orishas disagreed is not about who won. It's about how they chose to walk forward together, without erasing their differences. This vision of shared divinity has profound implications. It means that power can exist without conquest. That strength is not measured by the ability to silence others, but by the capacity to hold space for multiple truths. Each Orisha, in their essence, expresses a sacred contradiction. Ogun clears paths, but can also destroy. Shango brings justice, but his fire can scorch. Oya transforms, but her winds can disorient. Even Orunmila, the seer of fate, does not impose destiny. He reveals it and invites dialogue. No force is complete alone, and this mirrors the human experience. Within each person lives the struggle between action and patience, between fire and calm, between loyalty and transformation. To walk with the Orishas is not to pick a side, but to learn how to navigate the full spectrum of one's own being. This is why the traditions rooted in Ifa never reduce a person's path to a single Orisha. Through consulta and divinação, each individual discovers their constellation, the set of energies they carry, the tensions they must resolve, the gifts they must awaken. In this way, the ancient disagreement among the Orishas becomes the template for inner reconciliation. The gods did not resolve their conflict by erasing one another. They deepened their awareness of interdependence. And through their example, they invite us to do the same. In every sacred house where the Orishas are honored, there is a moment, often quiet, almost imperceptible, when the community collectively remembers this ancestral lesson. It may be in the gesture of a priestess pouring water on the earth before calling Ogun, acknowledging that his iron needs Obatalá's coolness. It may be in the silent glance between elders when the drums pause between rhythms, allowing the energy of the space to settle before the next invocation. These are not just ritual acts. They are echoes of a moment when divine beings realize that sacred power must circulate, must breathe. This is why no Orisha is seen as flawless. They are not perfect in the static sense. They are perfect in movement, in evolution, in how they embody the living contradictions of life. Shango's fire is tempered by Oya's wind, not to limit him, but to help him burn with purpose. Ogun's strength is guided by Orunmila's wisdom not to tame him, but to align his force with destiny. Even Eshu, the one who appears most unpredictable, dances not in chaos but in precision, ensuring that the balance is always challenged, always renewed, always honest. Among the initiated, this story is not recounted in full for dramatic effect. It is taught slowly, in fragments, across years. A proverb here, a ritual correction there, because its power lies not in entertainment, but in initiation. To understand it is to recognize that disagreement is not the opposite of the sacred. It is one of its most powerful expressions. And that reconciliation, when chosen freely, creates not uniformity, but a harmony deeper than agreement, a unity built on difference. And so, when communities fracture, when paths diverge, when voices rise in dissent, the elders remember. They do not rush to impose order. They invoke the story. They ask, which Orisha is speaking now, and who is not being heard? For in listening, truly listening, the path forward reveals itself. As the story nears its end, it becomes clear that its true resolution is not found in a dramatic conclusion, but in the return to rhythm. After the Orishas laid down their pride and reaffirmed their mutual purpose, they did not erase their individuality. They re-entered the cosmic dance, each returning to their natural cadence, but now with a deeper sensitivity to one another. From that moment on, creation moved differently. The rains fell with more coherence. The winds whispered with greater intention. Even the fire of Shango struck only where it was needed, not where it would consume without purpose. In the world of men and women, this reconciliation also began to shape how we live together. In Yoruba cosmology, the collective is always prioritized. A town is not healthy if its people are not aligned. A family is not strong if its voices are not heard. So too with the pantheon, unity must be lived, not forced. And this teaching found its way into every layer of culture, into how councils were formed, how elders mediated disputes, how children were raised. Even the architecture of villages reflected this truth. Circular compounds, open courtyards, spaces built for gathering, for sharing, for witnessing each other fully. Priests of different Orishas were encouraged to learn from one another. Ceremonies became opportunities not just for devotion, but for collaboration. In some traditions, when one Orisha is being honored, songs for others are still sung in the background, not as distractions, but as reminders. No one walks alone. No deity governs the world. It is the interplay, the chorus, the ever-adjusting harmony that sustains life. This is the inheritance left by the Orishas. Not a law, not a dogma, but a living rhythm, one that beats in every drum, that sings in every prayer, that waits in every silence, asking only, will you listen, will you adjust, will you return to the circle when the time comes? The tale of when the Orishas disagreed is not a story confined to the past. It is a living teaching, pulsing in every moment where disagreement threatens to become rupture, in the family dispute that lingers, in the tension between communities, in the inner battles we carry silently. It teaches us that conflict is not an error to erase, but a message to decode. That each voice, each force, carries a fragment of the whole. And when we listen deeply, when we recognize the wisdom in each perspective, we recreate the sacred rhythm that the Orishas themselves had to rediscover. This is why the tale was never written on stone or etched into temple walls. It was meant to live inside people, passed in hushed tones during divination sessions, hinted at during initiation, embodied in ritual. It is a wisdom too subtle for dogma, too vast for doctrine. And yet it speaks with clarity. Even divine forces must learn to yield. Even power must know when to listen. So, when a priest hesitates before striking the drum, or when a devotee pours libation to more than one Orisha, or when an elder pauses before speaking, Know that this tale is moving underneath the surface. The Orishas are still adjusting their voices, still negotiating the cosmos, still teaching through silence and storm. And perhaps that is the most sacred legacy of all, that divinity is not static. It listens, it evolves, it returns to the circle when the music calls. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a longing, a vision, share your reflection in the comments. And if you walk the path of the Orishas, or feel their rhythm stirring within you, write, "I carry the circle within me," below. Subscribe to Sacred Paths, Yoruba Tales, to journey deeper into the wisdom that time cannot silence, the living stories of the Orishas.